The Russian Revolution, a historical account of a pivotal moment. The Russian Revolution was a time of immense change, filled with passion, pain, and heartbreak. It was a time of upheaval and uncertainty, as the Russian people fought to overthrow a corrupt and oppressive government, and create a society that was more just and equitable for all. This is the story of the Russian Revolution, told in a way that captures the passion, emotion, and drama of this transformative period in history. The story of the Russian Revolution begins with the reign of Tsar Nicholas II, who ruled over Russia from 1894 to 1917. Nicholas was born into a life of luxury and privilege, and he enjoyed all the trappings of royalty from a young age. He was raised to believe that he was chosen by God to rule over Russia, and that his power was absolute and unassailable. Under Nicholas's rule, the Russian people suffered greatly. The Tsar's government was corrupt and ineffective, and the vast majority of the population lived in poverty and despair. Meanwhile, the Tsar and his family lived lives of unimaginable luxury and extravagance, insulated from the suffering of their subjects by a wall of privilege and indifference. As the 20th century progressed, the Russian people grew increasingly restless and discontented. They were tired of living in poverty and despair, and they longed for a government that would represent their interests and provide them with the basic necessities of life. The seeds of revolution were sown in the early 1900s, as workers and peasants began to organize themselves into unions and political parties. These groups called for greater rights and freedoms, and they demanded an end to the corrupt and oppressive rule of the Tsar. The revolution began in earnest in 1905, when a group of workers and their families gathered in St. Petersburg to protest against the Tsar's government. The protest, which became known as Bloody Sunday, was brutally suppressed by the Tsar's troops, who fired on the crowd and killed hundreds of people. The massacre of Bloody Sunday only served to galvanize the revolutionary movement. Workers and peasants across Russia took up arms against the Tsar's government, and a period of intense violence and turmoil began. In the midst of this chaos, a new political party emerged, the Bolsheviks. Led by Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks were dedicated to the overthrow of the Tsar's government, and the establishment of a socialist state that would represent the interests of the working class. Lenin was a charismatic and passionate leader, and he quickly gained a following among the Russian people. His vision of a better, more just society resonated with the masses, and his influence grew rapidly. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in a violent revolution that shook Russia to its core. The Tsar's government was overthrown, and a new government, led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, was established. The new government was based on socialist principles, and it represented a fundamental break from the old order. The Bolsheviks immediately set about implementing their agenda, which included land reform, worker control of factories, and the establishment of a planned economy. The establishment of the Bolshevik government did not bring an end to the violence and turmoil that had gripped Russia. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the country's history, the Civil War. The Civil War was a brutal conflict that lasted for several years and resulted in the deaths of millions of people. The Bolshevik government faced opposition from a variety of groups, including monarchists, nationalists, and foreign powers. The war was fought with great ferocity on both sides, and the Russian people suffered greatly as a result. Entire cities were destroyed, and famine and disease swept across the country. Families were torn apart, and many people were forced to flee their homes in search of safety and shelter. Despite the incredible hardships that the Russian people faced during the Revolution and the Civil War, the legacy of this transformative period in history is still felt today. The Bolshevik government succeeded in creating a society that was fundamentally different from the old order. The new government was based on socialist principles, and it placed the needs of the working class at the center of its agenda. The Bolsheviks implemented policies that provided workers with better wages and working conditions, and they instituted land reform measures that gave peasants greater control over the land. The revolution also had a profound impact on the rest of the world. It inspired workers and revolutionaries in other countries to fight for their rights and freedoms, and it helped to shape the course of world history in the 20th century. The Russian Revolution was a time of great change, passion, and struggle. It was a time when the Russian people rose up against a corrupt and oppressive government, and fought to create a society that was more just and equitable for all. The revolution was marked by intense violence and turmoil, but it also gave rise to a new government that was based on socialist principles, and that represented the interests of the working class. The legacy of the revolution is still felt today, both in Russia and around the world, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the transformative power of collective action and social change.